Well, Deloitte has released its annual review of football finance. In the 2009-10 season, revenues across Europe rose to an all-time high of more than 16 billion euros. But there is a catch. Most of that income went straight back into the players' pockets. Wages for Europe's top 5 leagues exceeded 5.5 billion euros. That is an 8% jump from the previous season. England's Premier League generated the most money, raking in a record 2.5 billion euros. But wages, well, they also hit a record. More than 2/3 of revenue was spent rewarding players. In Germany, the Bundesliga claimed the largest average attendance in Europe, with more than 40,000 fans at every match. Spain's La Liga also saw a rise in revenue, but once again, growth was driven by the two big names, Barcelona and Real Madrid. Well, to give us more insight into this report, I'm joined in the studio by one of its editors, Deloitte's Dan Jones. Welcome, Dan. I suppose the big question is what to do about players' pay, because it seems that all other things being equal, they just keep getting paid more and more and more. What happens?
Well, I think that one of the things that isn't equal is that the revenue keeps going up as well. So the wages aren't just going up in isolation, the revenue's going up as well to fund it. But as long as there's a sensible balance between those two, it's fine.
But is 2/3 of the revenue being spent on pay sensible?
And that's our concern at the moment, is really the Premier League had about 10 years where it was around about 60% of the turnover was going out on wages. And that's all wages, not just players, but everybody who's employed at the football clubs. And that was probably sustainable. Now it's edged up over 2 seasons to 67 and then 68%. And we've always said that 70% would be a pretty serious warning level. So as it stands at the moment, we'd really like to see that ratio come back down.
And do you think UEFA are going to weigh in and do anything about that?
Yes, I think what UEFA are doing with financial fair play will definitely make a difference. It will take a little bit of a heat out of the top of the market. And we've already seen at the bottom of the Premier League some teams taking a more prudent approach. And this is a pan-European issue. It's not England on its own. I think the great thing for the English clubs, particularly, is if you're looking at the UEFA regulations, what they say is break even, pay your debts in full and on time. Now, if those are the rules across Europe, the clubs that are in the best position are those with the most revenue, because it's easier to break even and compete for players if you've got the most revenue. The league with the most revenue in Europe is the English League. Indeed.
I also noticed that the English League has seen broadcast revenue go up quite considerably. In fact, it's gone up across the board, I think. Is that... it's quite interesting that in these straitened times, broadcasters are still prepared to pay more and more for rights.
Absolutely, and I think football has had a very, very good recession. I mean, this is a classic glass half empty, glass half full type report. Concerns on the cost side, but on the revenue side, phenomenal results really, and it's 20 years now of phenomenal results on the revenue side. And for broadcasters, football is such compelling content. It's one of the few things that ensures you get an audience together as groups. It reaches some key demographic groups, and they'll watch it live. The top quality sport has to be watched live to be enjoyed best, and that's very, very valuable to broadcasters, to their advertisers, and indeed people will subscribe to pay TV to watch it. So I think the pay TV companies have generally had a good recession, and so football's had a good recession.
Now, we saw Germany's got the best attendance rates. How much of the revenue is actually about people who go and pay for those tickets and go to the grounds?
Well, it's still an awful lot about that. It's still sort of around about 30% of the revenue comes from people going to the games, and people sort of forget that with the TV. And of course,
it's quite surprisingly high, isn't it, when everything else is considered?
And Premier League grounds are over 90% full on average for every match. And again, for the broadcast side of things, that's a key consideration. As a broadcast product, you want the grounds to be full of passionate fans. If you're watching something on TV and there's lots and lots of empty seats, you sort of, as a viewer, you're looking and thinking, well, if people aren't turning up to watch this game, why am I sitting at home watching it? For really good live sport, you want to feel like you're part of something very special.
And so, despite people complaining about high ticket prices, and they are very high, particularly if you want to take families and things, they are able to fill those stadia across Europe.
And I think, again, it's supply and demand. The attendances have held up very, very well. And actually what we've seen is clubs being pretty innovative about what they do. There's some very, very heavily discounted family deals, children's deals now around at some clubs where they've struggled to fill capacity before. Of course, if you can fill capacity from full paying fans, then in a competitive market, that's what you're likely to do. But there's lots of good deals around there at certain clubs.
Indeed. OK, Dan Jones from Deloitte, thank you very much indeed for joining us.